Happy March 31st, everybody, the last day of March. This is Peter Fabrizius, and I'm coming to you from home in the Los Angeles area. So today's topic is in regards to Betsy DeVos or DeVos, Richsplaining away budget proposals for increases to charter school, increases to executive pay, and decreasing of programs to the Special Olympics and other services which benefit the less fortunate. I watched some of her question and answer period in front of Congress. She's an excellent person. She's very evasive when she's asked specific and direct questions. Most of the time just uttering things like, we're following, everything according to the federal laws, in terms of discrimination against LGBT community and others. So, she's kind of just hiding behind that, not really giving a yes or no answer about her own opinions as someone who has very outspokenly talked about her Christian beliefs and values. I just want to interject here. I find it funny that this woman has so much money that her children never knew what it was like to have financial aid, never knew what it was like to have to apply for it. They were able to dole out the money to make sure their children got the educations that they wanted. And she never had to worry about where that money was coming from. And so as far as the charter schools that she is supporting, the majority of those charter schools, if not all, have, discrimination behaviors toward LGBTQ youth and are more Christian funded or Christian types of schools. And that's not to say that Christian schools shouldn't get some kind of funding. The problem gets to be when only Christian schools are getting that type of funding, and funding is not being given to other schools by reason of religious discrimination or discrimination against, the LGBT plus community. Just listening to her avoiding the answers yesterday and seeing how such malcontempt that she has for Congress and her position as Secretary of Education, that she can do whatever she wants in terms of allocating the money based on what her personal preferences are. And that is to give more money to administrators and such who are probably more than likely at schools, charter schools, where they're following Christ. Therefore, they should be rewarded by getting paid more money while taking money away from things such as Special Olympics and in other places in order to give those dollars away. So sadly enough, this is where we find ourselves at this point in time in the game with her. And it is a game to her. The woman has a summer home that is much more elaborate and beautiful than anything that 99% of Americans who are not part of the wealthiest could never afford. That she never has to worry, and it's a home that she might use, during a month in the summer, or to go to once in a while, and then she has other homes, and her lack of empathy for the Special Olympics and people with disabilities and the LGBTQ population, the way that she tends to show her disdain for, some of the schools that cater primarily to Black students, who, are already underfunded, and then cutting budgets out from under them as well, or, making decisions that actually benefit only those students who are going to charter schools and getting waivers or whatever to attend Christian schools that their parents want them to go to. And so all that money being steered in that direction and being taken away from those who are less fortunate and need it the worst. Um, However, this isn't surprising because this woman has been doing this kind of thing ever since she became Secretary of Education. To be somebody who is, taken for that role at the recommendation of Mike Pence, who's the vice president, and, recommends her. And she's the brother to Prince, who was involved in setting up meetings with Russia with some of the people during the election. And so, someone was owed some type of favor. Betsy DeVos or whatever was going to be put in a place of a high-ranking position just because of their loyalty to Mein Führer, Trump, and that she was going to make sure that everything that she did was in line with what he wants as far as cuts and changing, and especially Mike Pence changing things so that the Christian schools and stuff are getting the majority of the money. I think when you get into this, you're getting into conflicts of interest because there's supposed to be a separation of church and state. And so much is being done now where Trump has passed some things or signed some things that said, hey, religious freedom, these people should be allowed to be involved in politics and stuff. And I agree with that. If you want to be involved with politics and you're a religious organization, then you should no longer be tax exempt. You should forfeit your tax exempt status and have to pay taxes just like anyone else. And I think that should be back retroactive to the time 2016, 2015, even when people started ramping up for the election, and all the religious organizations who take in a lot of money got involved. One that comes to mind right offhand is Franklin Graham and the Billy Graham organizations, which is worth, I think I read months ago, about $65 million, maybe more. So they take in quite a bit of money. They're tax exempt, so they don't pay taxes, which is not surprising considering that our wealthiest of businesses in this country do not pay taxes, and they fall to other people to pay in taxes or the working class people who are struggling already and really working hard to try to make ends meet. Throughout this whole ordeal, whether it's Betsy DeVos or some of the other people who've played a major role in Trump's games, William Barr, Jeff Sessions, some of the other people, I can't remember all of them right offhand, but all of them, were involved in some, let's just say, situations where they were had a conflict of interest, and that conflict of interest should have had them excuse themselves from those particular areas. But most of the people they brought in, if not all, had different issues with the various areas where they were put into place over. So they were able to be put in places to undo many of the laws that have been done over many years to stop the way things were done in terms of the environment, global warming, emissions, funding for Planned Parenthood, funding for the less fortunate who don't have jobs, and that kind of thing. So a lot of programs were attacked, and then even for those people who have retired and get Social Security, and they get Parts A and B, or whatever the different parts are, Medicaid. They have money coming out of their checks to pay for insurance that that was deemed necessary. And I don't think this is fair to those people, and that needs to be undone. And they should be getting the full amount of their check because they need it to live on. Um, Moving on, with Betsy DeVos, one of the reasons why this is just so uh, disheartening is because there's so many other things going on in our country that to have to step back and take a look at this deters from the other things that are going on and allows those things to go on that are harming people, especially in other countries. And like gays being okay to, in some countries, stone gays to death for acts of sodomy. I mean, those are Neanderthal types of values and judgmental values, and thinking, going against the Bible in the Ten Commandments, that thou shalt not kill. And people are not even looking twice at these countries that are doing it and saying, hey, wait a minute, the Bible says thou shalt not kill. So you justify in your heart where killing is okay. Not all Christians, but many people judge and say, hey, those homosexuals deserve to die. And it doesn't matter, whether they served their country, whether they never hurt anyone, when they've always minded their own business. They just love someone same sex, which is inappropriate. So we need to kill them. So we'll kill the gays who commit sodomy. And then you don't kill lesbians, because lesbians quite often don't commit sodomy, because they just aren't built in a way that would allow them to do that. So how are you going to change or alter that so that lesbians and other people are killed for those reasons as well? You're really just testing God. And one political person on the right made a comment about Western civilization seems to be tipping off, and the deep edge. And in some ways, I would agree with that. Everybody's trying to take a side in all things, instead of looking at the value of who we are as a human race. Everybody is, trying to think of reasons that it's justified that people should be hurt or murdered. Yesterday, I responded to a couple posts where some Black guys had posted to an article on racism and made statements like all whites are racist, and have held POCs, people of color, down, and continue to hold people of color down because all whites are racist. And my response, because it did anger me, because this, whether you're white or black, I mean, racism exists. And when something is based purely on race, a comment, then you are a racist. I don't care if the person is white that you're talking about. If you're saying all whites do this, then you're generalizing, you're stereotyping. And so I talked to this individual and wrote about, I'm really upset to hear this, because many whites march with Black Lives Matter and many other groups to stop the oppression, or the continuing oppression, and making sure that laws are changed and that people are acknowledged for their value, and that police officers should be held accountable for the things they do in shooting and killing our Black men. And so people are standing up. And during the Civil War, when slavery was, before slavery was in its full force, you get a lot of people who are white, who played a major role in the Underground Railroad in making sure, especially Quakers, who made sure that blacks made it safely from the South to the North to escape slavery, and a lot of blacks were then left on boats to, I think it was Canada, and to seek shelter and to be free and to be safe from the oppression that was going on in this country at that time. So many whites gave up their lives, and on the battlefields, in the Union Army, many whites died for the freedom of slaves. And for anybody to turn around and say, but look at what your forefathers did, look at how they enslaved us. And so all whites are okay with that. All whites are proud that their ancestry comes from that. They're glad to have white privilege. I think sometimes we don't realize what it means to have white privilege. And when I say we, some of us do, some of us don't. Some don't care. Some think they deserve white privilege. And so, I think this falls to many of Trump's administrators. I think Betsy DeVos is one of them who thinks that she is well above and the normal person, that she has a lot of money, that her wealth should be able to buy her and attribute her many things, and that she would proclaim or stand to proclaim, things about Christianity and about how she's working for the good of God. And, it seems like she's working for the good of herself, for her beliefs, and to have as much money as she has. And there's no evidence that she donates a significant amount of her money to charitable organizations, or maybe she has a Betsy DeVos Foundation that kind of, does the crooked stuff that Trump did with his foundation. And so, it brings me back to the quote in the Bible about it's easier for a rich man to enter, or it's easier for a camel to pass through the eye of a needle than a rich man to enter the kingdom of God, because the rich hate to part with the materialistic things that they gain throughout life, including money, property, prestige, their pride. And if this means diminishing and wiping out a population, putting a bigger gap between the haves and the have-nots, then they're more inclined to embrace that attitude. And so the real play is getting many of the working class people and people who are disadvantaged in many ways, and even working class people tend to not have as many of the let's say freedoms and the rewards that come from being a working class member. So you don't have the wealth and the prestige, so you kind of are held at a certain place. And so, you're always going to be there. So they want that bigger divide to make sure that more people, I think in the wealthiest of 1% of America, who hold 99% of the wealth, the attitude is, this person comes from old money. It means it's from old money, like the Rockefellers, the, Ford. When you go back to Carnegie, those people who had the Vanderbilts, who had a lot of money and prestige back in the day, and they're the old money. And so a lot of people, have that old money and carry it forward. And then there's the new money, people who struck it rich or made money through, inventions, or made money through inheriting their wealth from someone else. And so they made money through, like Mark Zuckerberg and Facebook, for instance. And so that's kind of like new money. Okay, you really didn't belong to the high society, and you got this new money, and now you're coming in. And so people kind of, you're not old money, but you're new money, and that's okay. At some point, they tend to forget about a little bit. There's always that little bit of gossip, I'm sure, about your old money or new money or whatever, and things like that don't matter. But that I'm sure still goes on in the higher echelons of of the people in terms of wealth. Donald Trump is a good example of all that because he doesn't feel like he should answer for anything as president of the United States. He sees himself as king, or even higher than God in many ways, and people often refer to him as that person that's been put into power and ordained by God to do just the most wonderful things. And as I said before, and I don't care if this offends every Christian who sees this, if that's the type of God that would align himself with a habitual liar, somebody who would call names at people or trash their reputations, or be vile against them because they speak up to him, or they have their own opinion, or maybe they have their own evidence or knowledge of something that we don't. And so they speak up, and the first thing he's doing is trashing those people, whether they served in the military, whether they served in Congress, John McCain, especially. This man died. He's been gone for 7 months, and Trump trashes him and his status as a veteran, somebody who was in war. And since he was a veteran, I think that all veterans should be treated with respect and with dignity. And, talking the kinds of things he does talk behind John McCain's back, it's just really a nasty and an evil thing to do. He has children who are alive, a spouse who's alive, who is trying to mourn the death of this man who's not been gone all that long, and who spent his life working for the greater good in many ways. And so Meghan McCain and her siblings, I don't know how many she has, and her mother, they all have to listen to this beating down of her father and his the reputation that he left by Trump. And the man's not here to defend himself. And so this seems to be the epitome of what's going on in the White House and in Trump's particular area of government. It's everybody he has aligned himself with at some point he has had an issue with, and then later, come back and said that they were, no good at their job. They were lousy. They're incompetent, and they're fools, and that he barely knew them, when he initially claimed that he knew them very well, and they had a lot to give to this country to help make America great again. So, my opinion is we really need to remove this president from presidency and get someone who really cares about America and really wants to make America shine. Right now, I don't believe America shines to anyone, except for that we have a president who is crass, vulgar, and who tweets a lot of stuff and is constantly making threats and wild accusations that quite often he can't even back up. And then coming out and giving us stuff like the Mueller report, within just a few days, William Barr writes this overall assessment of, many and many pages of evidence and trial documents and things like that, and to come back and say there was no collusion. Y'all can buy that. Y'all can believe it if you want, because he said it. You think it's true. And it's probably most unlikely that anybody's going to convince you differently until a report comes out. And I would say a report that comes directly from Robert Mueller, not William Barr, who said, oh, I need till April 25th to allow this document to be released, which, in my mind, anybody who's aligned themselves with Trump has made changes to thing and then openly lied only to be indicted and to finally tell the truth. So nothing that William Barr could present to me other than allowing Robert Mueller to give me a copy of the document, or give many of you the copy of the document so you could read it and see what went on and what didn't go on. I wouldn't believe one word that comes out of Trump's mouth. So anyway, getting back to the Special Olympics, it's pretty sad when we have a education secretary who really sees no value in our young people in the Special Olympics, writes them off or discards them as pieces of garbage, pieces of people that she doesn't really care about, or maybe she thinks that the higher levels of people don't care about them, which is probably true. She's never been to a Special Olympics to see just how much joy that goes on the faces of these young people, how much fun they have, how much more alive they feel, and how much more important they feel to society overall. And it's a shame to take this from these young people. Many of them, their parents have worked with them, teachers have worked with them, other kinds of people have worked with them as well, and shown just the ability and the cognitive ability that many of the Special Olympics kids have, that shows that they're not unworthy, they're not without thought processes, they're higher level thinkers than you could imagine. And some of them are higher level thinkers than what we have in a lot of people, top-notch people today. I would say even President Trump, because I think a lot of stuff that he does is dictatorial and tyrannical and not really about reasoning or thinking things through. He just spews off at the mouth, and and that thought process can change on Twitter 4, 5, 6 times a day or more, just depending on his mood. I don't know whether he's got blood sugar issues, so he eats a crappy meal and then he comes back and tweets some stupid shit. Crap. And then feels justified in it and promotes it as the truth. It's really a shame because there's a lot of fake news, and many of you are always shouted out, fake news, fake news, fake news. And where you're getting your fake news from is the very source that you trust the most, which is from Donald Trump. And so he tells you it's fake news. So what do? You start spewing the same thing. The human race was meant to work together, to love and care for each other, and to be an amazing population of people that really work toward the betterment of mankind. And in the last several elections, what I have seen is the ripping apart of mankind, of people who embrace those who want to steal from America, to rob America of its values and its great resources. And clearing the swamp was the big thing that Trump ran on in the election. And all of you were like, oh, he's going to get rid of the swamp in Washington. He didn't get rid of it. In fact, he stocked it with some really major alligators, poisonous and venomous snakes, spiders, all kinds of cretins that are in those waters that came out little by little, that he pulled to his side, endorsed them in a major way, and then turned around and then trashed them when he was done with them, and they became evidence against him for some of the things that he did, and had them to threaten people in his behalf. I think back to the primaries initially when Ted Cruz was running and Trump was trashing him and putting him down. And then at some point after it was obvious that Trump was going to be the Republican candidate for president, then he started talking Ted Cruz up. He started talking Paul Ryan and Mitch McConnell up, two people that really did not endorse Trump at the front or pretended not to. And then later, what they did was they turned yellow, became cowards, and or maybe they weren't being cowards. Maybe it was all part of a bigger plan. And so they started to do exactly what Trump wanted. These very men who did nothing but stagnate every possible thing that President Obama wanted to accomplish. And these men gave or aligned themselves with Donald Trump and acted like he was just this amazing person, this businessman, and stood behind him and made sure everything that he wanted, he got. And it's amazing because this man pretty much has never accomplished anything great as far as business goes, other than to sell the Trump name to be used as a brand name. Many buildings in New York City, as I've said before, contain Trump's name, but Trump doesn't own them. He may own 5 out of the 20-some that are there, but other than that, other people own those particular buildings, and they still maintain the Trump name. Ivanka Trump's name on many articles or clothing lines, shoes, and all this kind of stuff, because deals were made with China, and some of these deals were made while she was having meetings with them in the White House or in Trump's tower, I don't know, penthouse or whatever it is. And people just look the other way. President Obama had his family members in the White House aiding and helping him in the manner that Trump has gotten away with. And he had his son-in-law working in the White House. All of you who support Trump know that you would be using that to complain and to see President Obama be impeached for emoluments violations. And yet many of you will justify and act like Trump's doing the breaking of the emoluments clauses is really funny, and takes quite a guy to be that way. Finally, it kind of shocks me that a lot of our young people think it's funny that Trump talks the way he does, and they say he speaks his mind. And people like Betsy DeVos and Jeff Sessions and a lot of the other people that have been part of his cabinet and are still part of his cabinet, where they refuse to answer questions being asked of them of the congressional parties. They evade questions. They don't even give straight answers. And many of you who are okay with Trump as president, you don't care. You don't care what's happening to the poor people or the working class people. You're hoping that somehow or another you're going to make a lot of money with Trump as president. And the really bad part is going to be when you realize that you're not going to get anything. It's not going to further you one iota of additional monies and make you wealthy. If you're not part of the wealthy already, you're not going to become part of the wealthy. You are just that other 99%, that the 1% who have control of 99% of the wealth. They don't want you in their area, their turf, their territory, because behind the scenes, who knows what goes on and how they support one another. If you're really truly Christian, it shows through your actions, and actions speak louder than words. And so a lot of what Betsy DeVos is doing, or DeVos is doing, is she's separating out her conflicts of to her religious beliefs, by giving money to charitable schools, the education funds, while cutting other programs that just, are for, the poor kids, or the Special Olympics, or the LGBT kids, to be able to go to schools, those charter schools where they're being discriminated against and not permitted to be. Um, and a lot of this is going on. And so you have to ask yourself, okay, if you think these people are so great, why aren't they giving so much of their money to these education programs, or to universal health care to help other people? It doesn't take your tax money to pay for this. The wealthiest individuals in this country have plenty of money. If they were taxed at the right rate, there would be enough money to fund many of the programs and initiatives that have been put forth through the years. And so we need those types of programs again, because a lot of people need and have to have some help once in a while. We all are going to have medical issues or whatever. And when you find yourself in that position, then you're finally going to understand what it is to walk a mile in someone else's shoes. So you should be thinking about that, because it can happen at any time, any moment, to any one of us. And I've been through an experience very similar. And I will tell you that it opens your eyes to many things, and maybe you realize how you didn't understand completely how other people felt. And then all of a sudden, your eyes are open to it. And then you wish that you could do something to change the past, and sometimes you can't. So I'm going to leave you with that thought. And I would encourage you that every night, that before you go to bed or whatever, that you really self reflect on how you respond to people, how you behave toward people, what you think about people, the mean comments that you might say to people on Facebook, or some of the other social media accounts like Twitter. And you hurt people's feelings and you don't even think about it. For instance, I remember someone saying to somebody else who mentioned about suicide, and he said, well, that person's a coward. And if they killed themselves, then nobody should feel bad about it, because they took the easy way out and they're just a freaking coward. And that is just a really callous, hateful, hard kind of mentality. And it doesn't say much about the person's character, because, in the big scheme of things, I mean, it's not their child that did it. So what do they care? And, or, it might not, things are not always as they appear. And so you have to think about that when you're responding to someone. You don't know what went on in their life, or walked a mile in their shoes. And so you don't self reflect enough to be able to know exactly what they've been through or gone through. And so, as far as that goes, I think we have an obligation to really stop and think about where the other person is in their life and the events that got them there. It doesn't mean that you have to justify, like mass shootings, or, serial killers and things like that. That's not what I'm referring to. I mean, serial killers, some of them have had pretty screwed up childhoods, but when they get off that beaten path, I mean, there's really no way back for them, because they've already crossed a major line. But I'm talking about people who've really had a hard time, and having someone like the special, or the education secretary, cutting budgetary monies from programs that are really, really important to some disadvantaged youths, and then turning around and giving that money in other areas, and even to like pay increases for executives or administrative people, more executives. I mean, it's a dirty dealing process. And And I can't see it any other way. You're taking from those who really have a need, and you're giving to people who already have their coffers full, and you're trying to give them an overflow in their coffers, and they're not going to share that. Just like the wealthiest, many of the wealthiest of Americans don't share the wealth that they have, and it's really sad. And I hope and pray for a better America. I'm not sure that it's ever going to change, but um, if we all become part of one race, I think we can make a big strides in that area. So that's all I have to say for today. Um, for those of you that don't know me, I got out today for a long walk in the sun, so I feel a little sun drenched, a little tired. Um, but my next podcast I'm thinking about is to talk a little more about integration and how we can integrate things to make a better America. And there's so many ways that we can work together and come together and make this world a better place, and to love each other as Christ loved us. And I think that's really important. um, Many of you probably think, oh, well, you're anti-Christian, and that's not true. I'm very much a Christian. I really believe that God wants us. Jesus said it best when he said, I give unto you a new commandment, that ye love your neighbor or your brother as much as I have loved you. And so Jesus wasn't out stoning to death people who violated a certain law, or stoning to death the prostitute or the adulterer, but instead embraced them and spoke with them and showed them the love and compassion that they needed. And that's what won those people over, not tyranny, not forcing, not taking away or taking away self-will and saying you have to be this way or you're going to be stoned to death or thrown in prison or whatever. So I hope you all think about it. Some of you might not ever think about it. Maybe some of you just feel that it's your duty to wreak havoc and torture on other people because deep down inside you have a psychological issue where you feel that you need to hurt someone. You need to be able to lash out at people, and maybe in some cases just literally get away with murder to justify having done it in the name of Christ. And I hate to tell you that many of you will be in for a rude awakening. But I do pray for everybody every night, and I hope that you will take these words and you will think about them, and you'll think about what they mean to the people who are at risk for being hurt or being disadvantaged. So for now, this is Peter Fabrizius signing off. It's 4:08 p.m. on March 31st, 2019. I'll see you on the flip side. Have a good night.